All right.
Okay, good to go.
Thanks. Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Manhattan Community Board for Waterfront Parks and Environment Committee. My name is Jeffrey LaFrancois. I'm the co-chair of the committee and joined by my fellow co-chair, Mr. Marty DeCat, as well on the squares this evening.
Hello, folks. And I'm not going to speak much tonight because I think since this is Jeffrey's last chairing of our committee, he's been promoted, as you may know, to something else. And therefore, everybody who has been a chair of a committee has stepped down to occupy the seat of the chair of the community board, which takes a lot of time. So we're excited to have you chair this meeting, and I'm going to shut up.
Thank you, Marty. I appreciate that. I too am very excited for what begins next month. And just, on a couple of points of business, we are holding this meeting via Zoom because the governor's executive order allowing us to do so in the state of the city and the state of the world right now. As is our custom, we'll take the items in the agenda in the order in which we have them laid out tonight, unless there's objection. We'll call for new business at the end, new or old business at the end, and the committee will hear an update on an item. We'll have discussion and questions. We'll then go to the public for any questions from the public, and we'll come back to the committee for any further questions or deliberation and determine whether or not we want to take a position on any given item. We are starting off this evening. Let's see here, just need to pull up my agenda. With a repeat item that was brought to us last month by the Hudson Guild regarding a proposal to build a pilot squash court at Chelsea Park to provide that to school-age academics and athletic programs in the Chelsea community. There was, I know, much discussion on the committee regarding that topic. Last time, Marty and I, earlier this month, we met with Steve Simon, the Chief of Staff to the Manhattan Borough Parks Department, had a discussion with Steve about if there's other examples of this type of use, of dedicated use around the city, of pilot use in other parks around the city. And indeed, there are a few. And before the committee, Marty drafted a letter that we felt summarized our discussion with the Parks Department and sort of teed up a possibility for how the Guild could engage with the park to see about reserving some space for squash courts accordingly. Ken Jockers is here from Hudson Guild tonight. I also had a conversation with Ken regarding the timing in which they potentially would like the park, the courts reserved for their use. And in an ideal scenario, Ken and I talked about 3 days per week, 4 to 6 p.m. ideally, but a 2-hour window. And then 1 day for 3 hours on the weekend. I know I was not at last month's meeting. I apologize. I had a work commitment. There's that paycheck job I have to tend to every once in a while as well. But I wanted to hear, I asked Ken to attend tonight in case there's any further questions, but I was hoping the committee could provide any immediate feedback on the letter that was circulated. And if we could have a quick discussion and perhaps get to a resolution so we can move on to the rest of our agenda. How do folks feel generally learning a bit more? Any thoughts on the time, number of days of week? Happy to open it up. Marty, anything to add there?
No, I see. I reread the letter, and I would change a little part of it. The second to last paragraph needs to say that we actually did a check of how often the handball courts are used. There was a time check of it, and I'm just going to hold this up to my window. I don't know if you'll be able to see it, but there are a lot of zeros in the boxes. I think it was included on the website. So it's not. I didn't tally it. It's not much used. There is. That was one of my concerns last month when we spoke. There is not much alternative. There is not much handball use. There is some, and there's no reason that we shouldn't purpose 3 of the 6 courts for handball for the program that was described to us last month, I mean.
And I also think 2 hours a day, 3 days on the week, and 3 hours one day of the weekend, to me feels, it doesn't feel like it's commanding those courts an aggressive amount of time.
I was really surprised by the number of zeros in that table. Now, it may have been.
Yeah, I have to say,
Summer,
Chris LeBron did send some comments that his concern was the time of year that survey was done. He thinks there might be higher use, which I think is totally fair. But I still feel what the Guild is asking for in terms of times of day and use, it's a reasonable accommodation that we could, obviously kick to the Parks Department to really figure out how best to manage. Any other comments or questions? Alan?
Yeah, I had one concern. I don't think it was brought up last time. A couple of years back, we had I think it was either PS33 or perhaps someone from Hudson Guild wanted to schedule some sort of an event at Chelsea Waterside, at the park, not Chelsea Waterside, but Chelsea Park. This goes back a couple of years, so I'm not recollecting it in total. And when they went to apply through the Parks Department to register, they were told that that particular field was booked out for the whole season, just about, by one of the organizations. So my concern is that this being something new, something different, that we have some large youth sports organizations on the west side, that somehow the scheduling needs to be somehow overseen, where someone can't go in and just book the courts for like a whole month at a time, which I believe was what happened a couple of years back, if my memory.
I feel like I have a hazy memory of that also, Alan. I don't recall specifically, but I do remember discussion about it. When we talked to Steve, he did flag sort of that this, once if we show some type of support here, it would then be on the Parks Department to work with the Guild to sort of provide some kind of first right of refusal if there's an interest in it in the time that they generally have reserved, was my understanding. I also thought that the Guild was asking for more time generally from the beginning. And then when I clarified that time, it felt a bit more reasonable to me. So if we want to, Alan, if there's a sentence you think we should include to sort of have that a special event consideration be in the mix, I think that's fair.
Okay. All right, maybe someone needs to oversee that. Someone can go in and just book it out. Whether they use it or not, it's still.
I think that's on the Parks Department, right? That's actually not on the
on the Parks Department,
right?
Yeah, it's on the parks.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And it's important to note that the squash program isn't booking out the total amount of time, as Jeffrey headed this conversation with. It's only 4 days a week, 2 hours, 3 days, and 3 hours on Saturday morning. So if somebody else wants to use it for periods of time, again, it's up to the Parks Department. But this program isn't prohibiting that from happening. So the circumstance that you described is not going to be caused by Hudson Guild.
Right. Renal?
Hi, I'm reading the letter and it says that there is going to be another survey, or was this the survey, the week-long survey that
the paragraph, the second to last paragraph, needs to be changed because the piece of paper I held up a few minutes ago was the survey.
Oh, understood. Thanks.
Leslie, did you have something? No? Okay. I thought I saw a hand and then you were going to go to the raise hand function. Any other, so right now it sounds like we're going to update that second paragraph, the second to last paragraph. We're going to put in the use 3 times a week, 2 hours on the weekdays, and 1 day on the weekend, 3 hours on that weekend day. I think we leave it to, I don't feel like we need to get too prescriptive. And if we show this support to the Parks Department, we leave it to the parks to coordinate with the Guild accordingly. Does that sound like something folks are comfortable with? Roberta?
I just had a question. Did you clarify whether or not it would be year-round? I know the tennis courts are closed, like there's an off-season. Is there an off-season here?
Mr. Jockers, was that a part of your, I didn't think about that.
We would be out there as long as the weather permits. So our goal would be throughout the academic year, it would likely be much less in sort of December, January, February. But if it's, if the courts aren't covered with snow and it's not raining or snowing outside, our goal would be to go out there.
Academic year plus the summer or not?
Yeah, academic year and the summer would be our goal.
Thanks.
For summer
I'll put that in the
programming.
letter.
Any other questions, comments? Okay, is somebody comfortable making a motion so we can move this forward? Marty, thank you. Is there a second?
I second.
Thank you. Any objections? Abstentions? Present, not eligible? Okay, great. Unanimous passage. And I thank everybody for their thoughtful, take up of this topic. It's kind of a first for us. And I think it's gonna hopefully bode very well for our friends at the Guild and really bring a new use to Chelsea Park. So
For those of you that were at the last meeting, you'll note that the letter mostly is a repetition of our discussion.
great.
Next time.
Ken, thank you for coming on.
Thank you all very, very much. Really appreciate it and look forward to continuing the conversation.
Yep, and
Thanks.
we want an update when there's a tournament or something, okay?
Understood. We'll
All right,
have them out
good.
there.
Thank
Thank you,
you. Take
folks.
care.
Good night.
Good night. All righty, thanks everybody. So moving on to item 2, we're gonna pass it over to our friends at Hudson River Park. I see Noreen is here. And we have a number of items to take up with updates from the trust. We're gonna take these in order. And I just wanna note before we even get to item D, which is number 4, which is 14th Street Park, I'm gonna be passing the gavel over to Marty at that time. I'll be voting present, not eligible on the item, given my my professional job, and just removing myself from the discussion on that, just so everybody knows in advance. But with that, I'm going to pass it over to Noreen to take up item 2A, the Pier 84 dog run.
Thanks, everyone, and thanks, Jeffrey, and thanks, everyone. Good to see you again. Before I do that, I just want to acknowledge and report, in case you have not heard yet, that Bob Trentline, whom we all acknowledged and thanked at the ceremony, if you were able to join us this past Friday, passed away yesterday. We knew that Bob was failing, and of course he's someone that we all have enormous respect for and is one of CB4's own. So I just do want to extend our thoughts for his family and to everyone who knew and admired him.
Noreen, thank you so much for doing that. I saw the Villager obituary this morning and meant to flag it, but I mean, Bob is a Chelsea legend. He is, I think, single-handedly responsible in a way for Chelsea Waterside, not alone, but a real dedicated individual who fought for Chelsea for literally decades. I mean, just his good handprint is across so much of the progressive West Side, both political, greening, newspaper, the whole nine. I learned a whole lot from him. I know many others did. So Noreen, thank you so much for flagging that. And he was a member of this committee, of course, for a very long time.
Of course. So I am actually going to ask Janine if she can pull up the presentation. We just have a couple of things that we want to remind you of. Here at the beginning, we've presented the Chelsea Waterside dog run, the Pier 84 dog run previously. And Kevin's going to walk you through this, but we're out to bid on it right now. We were slowed because of COVID and funding, but we're out to bid now. So we just wanted to remind you so that when work starts later this year, you knew about it. Kevin Quinn is our Senior VP of Design and Construction. He's going to walk you through this again.
Hi, me again. So last we saw this was in November of 2019. A lot has changed since then. So we actually showed this to you guys in November. You liked it, and we put it out to bid. We received bids, and then March 2020 came and we paused because we, like most people, didn't know what was going on. So times have changed. We're on a more stable footing right now. And so we've put it out to bid again. The bids are actually due Monday. And we thought it'd be good to just refresh everybody on what the design actually looks like. So next slide, please. Right, so for those who don't know, it's at the northeast corner of Pier 84, just north of the building. It's a pretty good location. You can see 2 crosswalks across Route 9A, pretty accessible. Next slide. Not the best dog run in the city right now. This is an existing condition photo from about late 2018, I believe. And you can see the pavement is a little crumbly. It's a little hard on the paws. The fencing's not great. Little dogs can escape. And the whole water feature system is kind of improvised. So those were things, main things that we wanted to address in this design. Next slide. This is looking west, again, kind of underutilized space, pretty boring. And you can see those dogs just want to escape right now. Next slide. So this is the new design by Joyner Pertz. New, I mean, we saw it in 2019, but we are basically providing a water feature at the western end of the park, which will be plumbed, proper, good drainage, and it'll be activated with a water bollard. This is similar to our Christopher Street dog run. The color, it'll all be new pavement, new concrete with a color seal coat with an exciting kind of graphic pattern in there. There'll be seating on the page right here. It's a backless bench for humans to sit and watch their dogs run around. Backless because it's close to that fence and we want to be able to see kind of both ways. We're going to be reusing some of the granite that we have in our collection from bulkhead work and other stonework that we've done in the park. So it'll be reused granite pieces for dogs to run around in and to break up the space a little bit. The trees will be kind of pruned, refreshed, fertilized, and protected. Protected with a grate that's also good for dogs. Won't get their paws caught in it, et cetera, but it will protect the tree. And then another set of benches on the page left, which is actually south side of this park. We'll also be redoing the fence around the dog run to close up some gaps that some of the littler dogs can squeeze through. Next slide. It's kind of a 3D rendering. You can see the Intrepid off to the right there. This may look like safety surface, but it's actually really smooth asphalt with a color seal coating, kind of similar to what's on basketball courts or our other dog parks. You can see some of the furniture, the backed benches with armrests on the left side and the backless bench on the right side, and the water feature kind of in the background there. Next slide. More exciting dog photos. You can see a little better shot of the water feature, and you can see kind of the orange column there to the left of the water feature, and that controls the water feature. It shuts it on and off. Slide. So that's the Pier 84 dog run. Fairly simple. Bids are due Monday. We hope to be in construction in kind of late winter and get it done in about 3 months. It's a pretty simple project. Hope to knock it out as quick as possible because the dog run is really heavily used. We don't want to knock it out of commission while we make the improvements for too long.
And I'll give a shout out to City Council Speaker Corey Johnson and to Manhattan Borough President Gail Brewer, who both provided some of the funding for this, or most of the funding for this.
Great. Kevin, thank you for that. Any questions on Pier 84 dog run? Okay, great. The puppies will be happy. On to Chelsea Waterside.
So this is just an update because we know you're interested in this project. So next slide, please. So last week we had a really great groundbreaking. See some familiar faces in that photo. It was a beautiful day. All worked out well. Next slide, please. just kind of a refresher on how we're breaking up the construction of this project. It's basically 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 zones. We're not touching the basketball court. We're not touching the playground. So those will stay open the whole time. Right now, the central blue area is completely demolished. We've finished demolition in that area. The dark purple area in the dead center is right where we had the groundbreaking last week. That's the comfort station, which is just beginning, broke last week. And the orange area, which includes kind of the overlook at the northwest corner of the park, that's in active demolition right now. The dog run, we were hoping to start construction in January, but we want to be very particular with the contractor and not start it any earlier than we need to keep it in operation as long as we can. And we'll be providing the users of that dog run notice before we actually shut that down. Next slide, please. Here's the schedule. Basically, everything's done. Winter 2022, there's actually a typo in that last bullet point, but everything should be reopened winter 2022. And the dog run, as I said, should be closing this winter, probably mid-January to late January, and then reopen in the summer. Again, it's heavily used. We're going to try and get that done as quickly as possible. Comfort station, that's the longest, often the longest, usually the longest. The building is the most difficult to build. So we're under construction now, and that will be done winter 2022. The sports field, much like the dog run, very heavily used. We've done everything possible to keep this closure as short as possible. And that's why if you go to the site now, we're working around all the edges while keeping the center area open and available for play. But we do have to close it in summer 2022 for about 2-3 months so that we can recarpet it and then reopen it. So everything should be reopened winter 2022. Maybe we'll have the synthetic turf open a little earlier than that. That's actually not a typo. That's what I intend to do. Get the ball field open fall 2022, a little bit earlier than everything else. So I was talking really quick there, but you can see it on your screen. Any questions on the schedule before we move on?
So it'll completely be done theoretically by the end of 2022.
Yes.
Yeah.
Not theoretically. We're going to do it.
We're doing it. We're doing it. Thank you.
And there's the contractor basically day one started with demolition and salvage materials in earnest. They got off to a great start, so we're feeling awesome. Good.
Okay. Any questions on Chelsea Waterside from the committee?
Oh, that was just a few more slides.
Yep. Okay. Sorry.
That's okay. Next slide. This is all the stone that, not all the stone, but some of the stone that we're reusing that we've pulled out. Those are the backs of the benches that ran around ran through the center of the park. Those are being shipped off and being remilled for use on the comfort station. Will be the cladding of it. Next slide. And this is the overlook at the northwest corner that was very unpopular with a lot of people. I thought maybe you'd like to see this. As of today, it's no more. We're flying through it. I think there's one more slide.
There's no more.
No more.
Yeah, I think that was it. Yeah.
There we go.
Great. Any questions on Chelsea Waterside demolition before rebuild? Okay, great. Moving right along.
I don't have the agenda in front of me.
Sorry, Noreen, my screen disappeared for a moment. We've got
14th Street.
14th Street Park.
Okay, good.
So I'm going to pass this over to Marty, everybody.
Okay. So we wanted to update you on a solution that we've identified for an issue that has been vexing us for the bulk of the year. That involves 14th Street Park, which we don't often talk to you about. It's one of two parks on the eastern side of 9A that are within Hudson River Park's boundaries. And it's also within the meatpacking bid, which is why Jeffrey has just signed off for the evening, because he's another stakeholder that we've been talking to separately on this topic.
He's coming
So
back.
I have a number of people here with me tonight for this topic, including several people from Little Island who will join me in discussing this. But briefly, the context for this is that Little Island had been using for its, what I'm going to call, for lack of a better word, a trash kind of station, a property owned by the State Department of Transportation in the meatpacking district east of Route 9A that the state subsequently auctioned off. And there is another party who won the auction. And so the place that was the place where Little Island would bring their trash for pickup by a private carter was no longer available to Little Island. And we explored a lot of places, looking very particularly at solutions that would not cause safety issues on the bikeway, safety issues for any staff members, safety issues on 9A, or really from our perspective, an operational or design impact on another area of Hudson River Park. And after a lot of exploration, we landed on a paved area that Hudson River Park caused to expand, related to the Pier 57 project, actually separately, on the south side of the existing 14th Street Park. It's an area that we can talk more about, both operationally and from a design perspective, but it's an area that is really not used by pedestrians for the most part, because people would choose to enter. See those three arrows? Those all represent individual entrances and exits to 14th Street Park. So this is beyond the gates on a paved area that is very little trafficked. And we wanted to talk with you about the solution idea and answer any of your questions about this. And I'm joined by Trish Santini, who's the executive director of Little Island, and Michael Wiggins, whom I think most of you probably know from Little Island. I'm forgetting Michael's exact title. I'm sorry, he can provide that. And I'm going to ask them to take it away from here.
Okay, thanks, Noreen. Hi, everyone. Thanks for having us tonight. Janine, well, we'll look at this really quickly. The two blue rectangles that you see in this overhead map are the locations that Noreen was referencing. So let's move on to the next one, and I can show it to you from a different perspective as well, just to give you a sense of what it looks like street level as opposed to overhead. So you'll see that there's two different enclosures. This shows you one of them. And I think if we go to the next slide, you get a better sense of the two. There you go. So the one on the left in particular, you can see where the two different locations are. The one on the right shows you where the one that's further east is. So they're positioned between those trees. From an operations standpoint, just so you know, these enclosures are intended to be designed so that the doors open out and the bins are housed within. It makes it more efficient for staff when they're transferring waste into those bins inside the enclosure. It's efficient in time, it's safe. We've been in conversation with our private hauler about their nightly pickups. They would pull over where you see almost directly in front of where the more eastern location enclosure is. They'll pull up there. There's a curb cut closer to the corner that they would use to wheel the bins, transfer the sanitation, and wheel the bins back into the enclosures. If we move to the next one, you can also see some of what we're talking about. You know, needless to say, it's very important to us that it meets an aesthetic standard, given it's coexisting with the park. It's also part of, you know, the vocabulary of Hudson River Park and the meatpacking district. So we've been looking at metal materials that we know that we can care for from a maintenance and cleanliness standpoint, but also feels like it belongs in the neighborhood. If you look at the next slide, you can also see we're looking at a variety of metal works. Janine, would you mind going to the next slide too? just to see the variety of things that we're looking at and considering. We put together a very simple RFP. So we'll be sharing that with a handful of firms, some of which are recommended to us from Hudson River Park. We had an initial conversation about this with Jeffrey as well. So we're going to start that process in earnest so that we can move the design process forward. I'm happy to take a breath for a minute in case anybody has any initial questions and provide other details.
Actually, I think there are a couple of things that you should understand for context first. So Little Island, when this was at the state DOT site or here, literally pushes handheld rubbish bins to the location. And then that's what Trish is talking about. They would be put inside an attractively designed enclosure so that nobody would be seeing the trash bins. Right. And the private hauler would come at nighttime when the park is not in operation, not pulling up obviously onto the curb or whatever in order to collect the trash, which is similar to what some of the other vendors in the park and in fact all around the city. There's, private carters typically pick up trash at nighttime because there's less traffic and it's easier for them to get around the city. And that certainly would be Hudson River Park's desire. Little Island knows, and Trish neglected her normal tagline. But
I'm happy to share it.
the maintenance of this, not having a trail of sticky garbage goo, not having any evidence, frankly, that there is trash inside these enclosures is very important to all of us. So Trish? Tagline?
Yes, I've said to Noreen that my pledge is that we will maintain these with the same level of care and cleanliness as we take care of the Little Island restrooms. And I say that because we had so much positive feedback about the care and cleanliness of the restrooms all summer long.
So we were told to get straight to the point tonight because you have a full agenda. We've just done that, but we are here in force to answer operational or design or other questions for you.
I'll start with two questions. Oh no, Roberta, go. You go. And then Ellen.
Thank you very much. It sounds like a very thoughtful plan. I really appreciate the presentation. I was wondering if you have, figured out who the vendor private trash hauler will be. I know that the city has had a lot of experiences or negative experiences specifically with private trash hauling companies. I just want to make sure that if the board is saying this is a great idea, that we're not, supporting a vendor who has threatened pedestrian safety or air quality or otherwise.
We're still talking to a few different folks, but we will not sign off on who the long-term person is without coordination with Hudson River Park as well to make sure everybody feels good and solid and comfortable.
We also can talk to sanitation since we work closely with sanitation. So get any input on anybody that is considered a bad actor or whatever.
Yes.
That's it. Ellen, please.
Thank you, Trish. And yes, your bathrooms are a pleasure to use.
Enjoy the go.
Thanks, Alan.
That's not my. Are the containers the same size as what you're using now?
Yes. So in each enclosure are 4 bins. So there's the smaller ones that Noreen was referencing that we wheel across, and then it gets transferred into larger size bins, but they're comparable to what we've been using. So there'll be 4 in each enclosure with a total of 8.
We should say that part of the conversation that Trish and Hudson River Park have had, but also that I think Meatpacking has had as well, is that these are sized smaller intentionally than the amount of trash that was generated over the summer because Trish has basically ordered the amount of trash to be reduced. In terms of the packaging and other things that are within the control of Little Island. So, there is this corresponds with an operating reduction plan in trash volume. which we certainly support.
Yeah, and in service, Ellen, to what we would need in the higher season, we will unlikely need all 8 bins there in the low season. So the 2 enclosures would still be there, but it's, it's just at a lower volume at this time of year.
Right, and what we've talked about is that in the off season, but also in the on season, we've talked with Meatpacking Bid about making space available in the container, the partially used or unused container in the off season, and then possibly a third smaller container that would be usable for the Meatpacking's programming or for our salt or, for wintertime operations or other things that actually have a benefit to the community, the park, the bid, beyond Little Island's need. So it would all have the same design vocabulary and all be arrayed so that none of it obviously is blocking sidewalks should people be choosing to go there, but meets a need that I think is handy because it's in an inconvenient spot for our staff crossing the highway to, empty a few bins normally, or for Meatpacking to bring their chairs or whatever, their yoga mats. If we can find a little on-site storage, which does not exist at 14th Street Park currently, that's a plus for us.
I'm particularly appreciative of hearing the reduction of the amount of packaging, which is a extremely important part of recycling and waste management. So kudos to you for that. I was going, this may not be the Little Island is south of our district. You're sort of straddling the border here. And this may not be the time to ask, but could you say something about your recycling program just to inform the committee? I'm sure you have one.
Yeah, everything is separated in the park, and then therefore the way, in terms of which bins it goes in and all of that, offsite is separated as well. So I think there's going to be, much like the reduction, I think there's also going to be some adjustments with packaging as opposed to, in terms of what is waste versus what is recycling. So we're in that work right now, primarily because it has a big impact with our food and beverage offerings. So as part of our postseason debrief, that's been a large topic, both internally for the waste that we generate, but also from a food and beverage perspective.
And you said before that you haven't identified your waste contractor yet, so you probably don't know if that contractor is going to single stream or to take separated items.
No, but I'm happy to talk with Catherine Lewis, our park operations manager, about that. And if that's a detail that's helpful, we can circle back with more information for you on that once we sort out the process.
We'd appreciate hearing about that a lot.
Yeah, happy to.
It's good to know. I mean, waste reduction is seriously important, and packaging for disposal is extremely important. It's got to start somewhere. I'm glad you're doing it.
Indeed.
Candace is next.
You guys pretty much answered a couple of questions I had. It was about how much waste was actually going into these bins and how many times a day are they going back and forth? Are they transferring like the little containers or like the bigger? I'm not sure the gallons. I know the smaller ones are like 96 gallons. Or are we putting like the whole big green containers, the gray containers, and pushing those across?
Yeah, I would say it's probably about, on average, 4 times a day in the high season. Like if I were to think about it right now, it's once, maybe twice a day, but in July and January, it's obviously very different, but I would say it's probably going to average out to about 4 times a day in the high season.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Candace. Brad, sir, you're next.
Hey, Martin.
Hi,
I personally think this is really disappointing. I think I'd rather take a space like that and give it back to the public, and even maybe a dog run. The fact that we spent, and it's so beautiful, Little Island, that there's no plan for the garbage is disappointing, as that's what I mean. it will be used 4 to 6 times a day right in front of the park. It'll stink, and they're going to keep coming back. And it's only going to get more. Little Lion is not getting smaller with people. It's only more. So I don't think this is the right solution. I mean, right now, Noreen, when they bring garbage back across the street, don't you guys use a little, you guys have a trailer on one of your carts and it picks it up and moves? I just don't think this is the answer. You're right next. I'd rather use it for more public. So I just think there needs to be more thought to this, in my opinion. I'm all for making a storage area if the bid needs something like that for the activation of the park. But I just think this is a long-term problem and this is a short-term answer. Thank you.
I want to take Brad's comment seriously, and I wonder if you have a reaction.
Sure, I can start, which is that, as I said at the beginning, we looked at a lot of different options before settling on this one. The fact is that parks, that trash is generated and trash needs to be removed. And at the moment, Little Island, obviously was the hottest ticket in town this summer. Maybe at some point it settles off and there's further reduction, and then more opportunities open up as the amount of overall trash is reduced. So I think we can consider it to be something that we kind of keep considering. But right now, the solution that is not a good solution is for a trash vehicle or a vehicle collecting trash to be constantly going on and off the pier. There is not a space in Hudson River Park. Like we don't have, lots of our own container solutions throughout the park for trash. Trash currently comes down to Pier 40. The amount of trash right now that would be generated here is frankly not something that we can reliably handle at Pier 40. That's been looked at specifically. And we don't have another spot in the park. There is not enough room here, Brad. I hear you on public space. Public space is valuable to us all. But there isn't enough room here to create a dog run or something like that. We can show you the dimensions again. It would not be a safe thing to do anything like that because it is so near two two big roads. So from a safety perspective, having that kind of use in this area is not appropriate. I think adding more trees or other things at some point to make it a better plaza is something that could work and could be, successful. And I think that could coexist with somebody's storage. So I hear you, but I think your comment is in part about the nature of just trash. And, I know that we spent a lot of intellectual capital and planning time on this issue for 6 months before landing on a solution that I feel like I can stand behind, that I don't think it damages existing 14th Street Park, and I don't think it damages a streetscape that is going to be in a way that the public significantly notices. But that depends on having extraordinarily clean operations, which is something that Trish and I have talked a lot about. But I hear your disappointment, Brad, and I'll own it.
I would say, Maureen, we have a dog park up right on the West Side Highway, 6 feet away, right up where you're doing now. So the response of saying it's by 2 roads, I can't really accept that one.
It's a really small area. Kevin, can you dimension it? I mean, and we're building a dog run across the street at Gansevoort right now, but it is it's the area we're talking about.
What I mean, Maureen, is that if we're adapting a fence, we can move back that fence. It could be around the trees. There's a lot of area on that corner there. My also point was this beautiful city facility didn't recognize that they had to put storage in there for her garbage. I mean, I build buildings, Maureen. We spend a lot of time on where we're putting everything. So that's shocking to me. That's kind of what I meant. And also, what about the Google Pier? Well, I'm calling it the Google Pier. They have that big service entrance that goes down. I mean, why can't we put 4 bins right there? That's not even crossing the West Side highway now. So I just think it needs to be looked at again. And I also, no matter how clean it is, it's gonna stink. And that's the park right there. I just think there's a better way.
Well, we've looked at Pier 57 and they have their own garbage room that has no room for additional trash. We've looked at Gansevoort and, even though that's not your district, I certainly hope Community Board 4 members will be using it. We've looked at a lot of locations and this is the best location that we've identified.
Maureen, we're talking about 4 bins. You're telling me the Google ramp where they're putting theirs, there's no room for 4 bins? I'm not buying it.
No, it's not 4 bins. It's 4 bins in each enclosure and there is not room. Rather, it's a huge facility that has Google, a market, food, restaurants, all of those things that we've talked about. You build buildings, you know what that generates in terms of trash. And they have their own storage area, garbage room there.
For me, Brad's comments raises 2 issues, and I thank you, Brad, for your comments. The first is the most minor. What have you done and what are you doing about odor mitigation in this site so that it doesn't affect the 14th Street Park or anybody near it? And the second is that we have never had, our committee have never had a conversation with you, Noreen, or your organization about overall trash management and recycling up and down the park. And I think that might be it's not a conversation for tonight, surely, but it might be a conversation that would serve everybody very well to have. It would in part answer some of the questions that Brad is asking, but it would make us all more aware of the management of the environmental management of the park.
Yeah, we'd be happy to do that. Unfortunately, we are losing Deborah Kuska, who's here. She's our longtime vice president of operations, and this has been in her realm for a very long time. She got a significant promotion and is leaving to another of our sister agencies, and but has been training. Where's Christina Singh there? Christina Singh is going to be taking over for conversations like this. So we'd be happy to come back, Marty, at some point with Christina, with Deb's brain imprinted on Christina to answer questions about that.
I would look forward to that and hope that we will be able to schedule that in the near future. I had I'm not sure if Brad is finished. If he is, I'll ask my other question.
Marty, is there water there? So when they spray down, because no matter what Carter you get, these guys are getting paid $20 an hour, $15 an hour. They rush in, they rush out. It's like going to a McDonald's parking lot. No matter what they do, it's going to be a mess. It's going to smell. And I'm not saying they're not going to do a good job. I just think there's got to be another way. That's my opinion. I know, Maureen knows how much I love this park and what you guys do. It's just, I'm struggling with this. That's all I can say.
I'm hoping that folks will come back to us about the management of that site. Or talk about it now, its management and cleanliness. And then my additional question, Trish, you have 2 questions to answer.
Okay.
Are there any residences nearby that? Because if there are, I live across from FIT and they used to do midnight trash pickups and that was terrible for me as a resident. So I'm concerned about night pickups if they're on the other side of 9 o'clock.
There's a very short duration hotel opposite the building, like an hourly hotel.
I guess there's other names for that.
That was very well done, Noreen.
My polite answer. It's been there, I think, since the 20s or 30s. It's fascinating. Someone should do an article on it someday. But that is the only kind of use along those lines, Marty.
And if a development occurs where there are serious residences, long-term residences, that'll be an issue you'll have to deal with because late night pickups won't work.
Absolutely. I mean, again, I think that we spent a lot of time hoping that an offsite out of park solution could be identified for this, is what I would say. And we dead ended. So with that said, this was, as I just said, the one that we could stand behind and stand in front of you on with, even though I'm disappointing some people, with something that I think is a reasonable solution. And Tricia, we're going to talk about operations, I think.
Yes. I was just going to say, Brad, I would be more than happy to set time to do a walkthrough with you and include Catherine Lewis, our park operations manager, and Juan Meta, who oversees our custodial team, and show you our current way of working, where we're transporting, how we manage it, but then also talk you through in great detail the plan that we're starting to put together for how to manage the space that Noreen is referencing. So I'd be more than happy to do that, to go to the site with you, to talk through the details of it, so that any questions that you might have, we can address in real time, and we can be doing it on site, which I think is always helpful because the context just feels more meaningful than doing it in a format like this. So I'm happy to follow up with you and set time to do that if that would be helpful.
Well, that's appreciated, but I'm more concerned about it not being there. It's not so much on your great staff and how you run it. I literally just walked on that corner a week ago, right to the park. It was great. It was freezing, but it was great. I mean,
brisk.
when, Maureen, you take the trash up and down the park now in carts. I just don't see why you can't fit at Pier 40 over there. There's hundreds of parking spots. There's a spot to make a gate around inside over there. I just think it's a bad idea.
So we've explored that at length, and again, can talk about it at length, but it doesn't work at Pier 40. It doesn't work at Pier 40 because Pier 40 in its own right is a really busy place, because the headroom for where a truck could get in, believe it or not, doesn't work in almost the entire pier, because the existing compactor we have for the park is now behind a security gate because of terrorism incidents and other things like that. And the unpredictability of the operations at Pier 40 with the 2,000 space parking garage, the 250,000 ball field users, hornblower cruise ships operating at different times whenever there are different types of operations and parties. It is not a site that is easy to operate as it is. And the volume of trash right now at Little Island is significant, and it would put us on tilt. So if we are able to continue reducing the amount of trash at some point, different solutions may open themselves up. Right now, it doesn't work.
Maureen, I think it's worth mentioning too that we're going to have Gansevoort Peninsula online, Pier 97 online, and we've opened up a lot more Pier 40 as well. So we were already kind of maxed out, and we're kind of panicking about how we're going to handle even what we're building out now, which is why we don't have the capacity to take on anymore.
I'm gonna say that Brad's comments are noted and probably shared by other members of the committee. And unless Brad has another issue to raise, I'm going to go to Roberta.
I just wondered if anybody'd ever given any thought to taking some of the trash out by boat. I mean, we have trash boats all over the place. I know they aren't set up for it, but I mean, that's a possibility. And then you wouldn't have to store it and bring trucks in.
We did actually. It was an idea that one of our board members came up with as well, Gwen. It's just right now it doesn't quite, there isn't that kind of service, but maybe someday as our waterways are more heavily used, but it would still, the amount of space that it would need or the frequency of the runs and then where they would go couldn't be quickly solved.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for being patient, Roberta.
I wanted to confirm whether the containers that will go inside the metal enclosures will be fully enclosed, and if there are any rodent mitigation plans beyond that in order to prevent pests from congregating around.
Yes, all the bins inside close and seal fully. So, you know, if you think about like a trash can we might all have that clicks so that you really know it's closed properly. And the pest control service that we use in the park will also be, that location will be part of their regular maintenance, just like the locations that they service for us in the park.
Thank you. Are there other comments or questions about trash management of Little Island at the 14th Street Park? Jeffrey, sir, the chair is yours.
Thanks, Marty. It's called the Liberty Inn, and that was a great moment, Noreen. Thank you for that. Only one left on the west side, is my understanding. But
there are others in the city. As a Bronx River activist, there is what was the language that Noreen used? They called it a hot sheets hotel up there.
Noreen was being the professional, Marty, so we'll leave.
Noreen said short-term use. Anyway, our conversation is degrading.
Yes. Well, thank you for handling that, Marty. Noreen, is there anything else outside of 14th Street Park to share this evening? I think it was the final item on the agenda.
No, I don't think so. We are striving to plan our summer season or spring season next year. And so at some point we will hopefully be back with you with some programming updates in kind of March-ish.
When it's a little bit warmer.
Yes.
Okay, great. Well, thank you for all those updates. I know there's also a whole bunch of, and if anybody didn't see the private passage relocation this month in Clinton Cove, West 42nd did a piece on it, and it's really neat to see. So excited to have that come back, returning restored.
I did want to mention that there is a little sign on site that promises that it will return in case you have Clinton constituents wondering.
And it's appropriately quippy. I appreciated the sign, so it was good. Okay. I do have a member of the public with their hand up. Catherine, Janine, if we could allow Catherine to speak. I'm not sure if she has a question for the trust, but let's find out. Catherine, are you here?
Hello? Hello?
Hi, Catherine. Go ahead. We can hear you. Did you have a question?
Yes, I did, because I wasn't sure if the Noreen and them were going to leave the panel. Are they sticking around or are they going to leave?
Their portion of the agenda is done, so this would be their cue to exit stage left. But if you have a question for them, this would be the time.
Yes, that's what I thought. Okay, so I'm here specifically to talk to them. I'm trying to get my video going so you can at least see me, but oh, start video. Okay, here we go. Okay. My name is Catherine Hedden, and some of you know me, some of you don't. I represent USA Pickleball. I'm the USA Ambassador from Manhattan. And this is, we have a team, we have a committee now of team leaders that have been working with the Parks Department and getting us painted pickleball courts throughout Manhattan. They've been very welcoming. And it brings me back to Pier 76. So Pier 76, we had our pickleball community had a evening of pickleball there where we we chalked out lines, and it was very successful and fun, and it's huge, as you know, Pier 76. And we also now want to get a youth program started. We had a youth tournament over at St. Barton's on the east side, which was very successful. And now we want to get more youth. I heard you talk about the squash youth program, and we're also interested in now starting a pickleball youth program. And many of us became certified through IPTPA to teach. So with Pier 76, what the park has been doing is, rather than, it's more of a process to give us permanent courts where they have to put poles and it obstructs people's paths or whatever. They've been allowing, or they've been taping and sometimes painting just the lines like you do basketball or anything else. So what I would like to do is, what is preventing us or the Hudson River Park from taping, and where we bring our own nets, we bring our own balls. It's basically just taping lines, pickleball courts on Pier 76 out of the way.
Well, I mean, in parks, constituent groups generally don't physically just create the space they want to create without a consultation with the park.
Right.
And with the community about the way that everyone wants to use space. So I appreciate the passion that you and others have for pickleball, and know that it is the fastest growing sport in the United States at the moment. So I'm educated on this, but there are also people that come to us for all kinds of other uses. And we also use Pier 76 for other uses. So frankly, what you're suggesting is that you're jumping in assuming that you're the only person with an idea for.
No, that's not correct.
Could you just pause for a second? There's a process for planning things, which includes us talking with the community beyond a dedicated group of users for a particular type of use about a place. So I think that the process is, you start with talking with us. We separately have been exploring whether there is a way to handle something like pickleball, not necessarily even just at Pier 76. So I'm sympathetic. I'm just saying that you have kind of jumped the gun on process.
And I hear what you're saying, but I disagree with that, because I was here the last time you were here and you said the exact same thing. With all due respect.
You were here the last time on Pier 97 saying, why was there no pickleball planned?
No,
and we've gone through a process already that involved public hearings and public process to get ideas for Pier 97, and no one at the time spoke about pickleball. So you came in at a point when the pier was already designed.
So right now, Pier 76 is not what it will be.
No, I think
the trust, Catherine, if I may, the trust has a history of running significant and well promoted and indeed well attended planning charrettes when the time comes to turn that pier into a proper park. And people organize and attend and work hard to get what they want there. I understand your interest is in an interim use. I also understand that Pier 76 is sort of a complicated interim pier in the park, in sort of what's allowed and not allowed there. So I'm not sure if, Noreen, it's worth considering, is there some sort of plan you're asking groups to put together to be considered for potential interim use when that's a possibility? I know there's still a bunch of things still being figured out on 76. So is there something anybody can put together that is a way to consider something, or just?
I mean, I think that we've had people approach us about learn to bike and pickleball and other types of things. And they're all things that deserve consideration. We just are not going to, basically the first thing that comes in without thought about what it does to the overall site, just say yes, because then we actually, it deserves a plan, even if it's just an interim plan. So, Catherine, I am educated about pickleball. I'm sympathetic. I'd like to find a way to do it. I'm just saying that, I'm not quite sure if you're just asking for us to put courts in or paint stripes in. We're not going to do that without a chance to think about the site. And if you've been using it in the short term, it seems like, you're using it in the short term.
I think you're misunderstanding me. Is basically what the bottom line is. I think I'm not communicating to you in the right way of how you're going to hear it. I'm asking to work with you, not go rogue, not just go and put them anywhere. The Parks Department has been working with us, and that's basically what I'm asking you to do in your, Hudson River, like Jeffrey said, send you a proposal. I'm asking, yes, just to paint lines. I know that they use it for many different things. When we were there playing, when we chalked the sports out, there were skateboarders, they were having a race with those other things. And because they're just lines, we're not asking for poles or permanent nets. It's a multi-use thing. So I'm asking to work with your organization to say, okay, you could have painted lines over here, and it is temporary. I'm not saying permanent, but rather than go and chalk them all the time, maybe we could say, okay, in that corner, you could paint 2 courts, but I'm asking to work with you, not coming here expecting anything other than to say, I'd like to work with you, which is what I said the last time for Pier 76 is like to work with you.
So this sounds like a back and forth that is Catherine, you have an interest. Noreen has an interest in a position in a big organization. I understand the heavy hit for advocacy here and a desire. It does sound like there's an interim. Chalking is a pain, I imagine, but at least there's a possibility to do something there. Noreen, I mean, is there a separate conversation to be had? Separate and apart from this? Obviously this isn't on the agenda, and so is there something for the trust to consider?
Yeah, absolutely, Catherine. I think the approach is sure, but we should be talking separately. I mean, it's kind of conventional, but I get calls all the time from people with ideas. Call me.
So I think
I talk to people.
I can attest to that. Noreen and I talk a
Okay.
lot. So Catherine, I think the recommendation is to reach out directly to the trust.
Okay.
And they have a great team of folks that I'm sure you'll be pointing to the right person to have this discussion and see what can be done. So
I
thank
think
you
our
for raising
committee
it tonight.
sent a letter to Tom, and he was very receptive. And then I think Tom stepped down, but yes, so we sent a letter to him, and he was very receptive to our needs and was going to consider it.
So
Okay.
Tom Linden?
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, there are operational, there are a lot of issues to consider. It's, it's appropriate for you to tell us what you think works. And then we need to tell you back that if there's a blues barbecue event on Pier 76, that there won't be pickleball that day. Right. I mean, so, and you need to understand things like that. So there's a conversation, there's room for a conversation. And you should talk with us first.
Okay.
Brad, is your hand up on this issue?
Maureen, I just wanted to tell you, I want to put a garbage place on Pier 76, so make sure we have room, all right? But one thing just hit me though, Martin, you remember when we got the pitch that they were going to put a chute underneath the High Line for all the garbage?
Yeah, the pneumatic tube.
Right. Maybe long-term, Maureen, sorry. We try to think about some type of garbage tube system there on the pier, maybe.
Hey, that sounds super cool.
Because it goes right to an incinerator. You know what I mean? So, or a barge. So it might be there's something to consider. Thanks.
I think that does sound great.
We need to
Trying to
find
like-
out what the status of that pneumatic tube project is. I haven't heard, and the pandemic has certainly put a crimp in the airflow. Sorry, that's a bad.
And there's a new administration coming, so we might want to dust that off. So, Catherine, thank you for being here and raising that.
Thank you.
Noreen, thank you for the updates this evening across the board. And I'm gonna end the Hudson River Park portion of the meeting and move on to the next of on our agenda. So, thank you to the trust for being here tonight. Exciting stuff.
Bye, everyone. Good to see you.
Likewise. Thanks, Noreen. So the final item on our agenda is a discussion regarding marine power solutions in NYC. This is derived out of a lot of the talks that we've had really about our push for specific shore power, which is, excuse me, different than this, but to convert the Manhattan cruise ship terminal into drawing power from our power grid, as opposed to keeping ships pumping diesel particulate matter into the air when they're docked at the pier. So Brad, Mr. Pasquarello from the committee connected Marty and I with Jonathan Colby, who's here tonight to talk to us about this topic. So Jonathan, I'm going to pass it over to you.
Excellent. Can you hear me?
We can.
Good. Well, good evening, everyone. I'm Jonathan Colby. Thank you very much for the invitation and the opportunity to be on the agenda. I have some slides that I'll show. I've been with the company. We're a private company called Verdant Power. I've been with the company just over 15 years, working here in New York City. I was laughing because this is about the East River, and I'm guessing that most people are going to be much more interested in the Hudson River than in the East River. I can tell you we have studied the Hudson River, and the Hudson River is a much more complicated flow than the East River. So the East River is actually what's called a tidal strait, whereas the Hudson River is what we would call a tidal estuary. And the difference is that in and around New York, the Hudson actually has a river associated with it, which obviously starts in upstate New York, or comes from upstate New York, excuse me. The East River actually has no freshwater source. The East River is a conduit for water that's in Long Island Sound that moves out to the Atlantic Ocean, and then every 6 to 6.5 hours, that water moves back from the ocean into Long Island Sound. And that same movement of ocean water from the Sound back into the Atlantic occurs on a regular basis. It's driven by the moon. There is a small amount of inflow from the Harlem River, but it's very, very small compared to the tidal flow. Most and many New Yorkers, if you can believe it, don't know that the East River changes directions 4 times every day. I'm guessing, given the committee that this is, that you all do in fact know that the tides change 4 times a day across the New York Harbor. People that are on the water would certainly know that, as they have to time their sailing and kayaking and swimming and other events pretty carefully because the tides are so strong. The Hudson, with its mix of a real river and a tidal estuary, leads to, as I mentioned, very complicated flows. You have flows on the surface moving in one direction and flows on the bottom moving in the other direction. You also have a mix of freshwater and saltwater, and their different densities lead to different flow phenomenon. The East River is much better suited for the type of work that I'm going to talk about today. So I do want to highlight the success we've had in the East River. I'm also laughed that I used to live on Jane Street, just west of 8th Avenue, which is like 2 blocks south of District 4. And I currently live at 65th Street and Broadway, which is like 2 blocks north or 3 blocks north. So I've never actually lived in this community board, but I certainly love the west side of Manhattan and appreciate all the work that's done on the west side of Manhattan. So what I want to talk a little bit about today is our Roosevelt Island Tidal Energy Project, and specifically talk about how we are getting electrons from the East River being delivered to New York City. And any Con Ed customer in New York is getting a small amount of electricity from the East River. I'm sure everybody knows it, but you're looking here at the east channel of the East River. The red bridge is the Roosevelt Island Bridge that connects Long Island City, Queens to Roosevelt Island. You can see the Ravenswood Generating Station, which is just behind the Roosevelt Island Bridge. And then off in the distance, you can see Long Island City, Queens, and some of that development there. So next slide, please. So kind of preface some of this, if you really want to produce electrons from the moving water, you really need 3 main things. You need a site. And so that site needs to have a number of key criteria. And for us, the site is the Roosevelt Island Tidal Energy Project, and the water is the East River. You obviously need a technology that's going to convert that moving water into electrons. And so for us, that's our Gen 5D turbine and the tri-frame, and I'll talk just a little bit about that. And you need funding and capital, because energy projects are pretty capital intense. And so for Verdant, the key funding has come from the U.S. Department of Energy and from NYSERDA, which is the New York State Energy Research and Development Authority. NYSERDA has been a long and strong partner of Verdant Power here at the East River Project, as has the U.S. Department of Energy. Next slide, please. So I'll let all the pictures tell the words. I always like to show this, especially to New Yorkers. This is a map of the bottom of the East River. This was taken with sonar, and it's taken at ultra high resolution. So this is down to centimeter scale. So you're actually able to see what's beneath the water of the East River. Some cool things, you can see the large boulders and exposed bedrock associated with the bottom of the river. You can also see some of the timbers that were left from the construction of the Roosevelt Island Bridge and some of its fendering. And you can see a deep depression, the blue is deeper water, that was left as a result of the construction of that Roosevelt Island Bridge. Our project is right here in this sort of nice, flat, moderately deep region. Roosevelt Island is to the north, which is where we make our grid interconnection with Con Edison. Next slide, please. The regulatory permission for this project is granted by FERC, which is the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. Verdant has actually been at this project for more than 15 years. The FERC license was issued in 2012, and that enabled us to sell the power that we produce to the grid. Again, that was with a Con Edison distributed generation interconnection. And so as I mentioned, our electricity hit the Con Ed grid and went out into the broader New York City area. And so technically any Con Ed customer would have been receiving a small fraction of their power from the project there on Roosevelt Island. There is a docket number if you're interested. It's 12611. Most of this information is publicly available for anybody that is interested to learn about the environmental monitoring, the technology development, and some of the regulatory constraints that we had for the right project. Next slide, please. So this is the technology, and again, I love to show some cool pictures. So the upper left are the 3 turbines that were recently deployed. You can see the blades in white and the body of the turbine in grays and steel colors. On the upper right is the tri-frame that rests on the bottom of the river. You can see the turbines in the bottom left have been integrated onto that tri-frame. And on the bottom right, you can see that tri-frame being lifted. You can see the 3 feet, and those 3 feet you can also see have spikes on them. This frame weighs about 105 tons, which is about the same as a 737 at takeoff. And this frame rests on the bottom of the river with its own mass. And those teeth help it engage with the bottom of the East River. Next slide, please. We bring a large group of on-water assets to the site to support the deployment and retrieval of this tri-frame. So here you can see a large crane barge, a spud barge, and what we call our transit barge with the tri-frame and 3 turbines. Roosevelt Island is off to the left, and you can see some of the crowd that has started to gather as we deploy this system. Next slide, please. The precise location of the system is determined beforehand, and we use high fidelity GPS on the tip of the crane to confirm the specific location of the tri-frame itself. And so that crane tip is positioned in exactly where we want it, over the surface of the river, as you can see here. We wait for the current to stop and for the tide to switch. That moment is called the slack tide. And at that slack tide, the water velocity approaches and reaches 0. And so that's a moment when the water is stable and there is not a whole lot of movement. And so that allows us to safely lower this to the bottom of the river. Next slide. We can see here the view from the barge as we're lowering the system into the water. So we've lowered the system about halfway at this point. The company came up with an innovative single point lifting system. So in the middle here, you can see a cone and bucket shape with a blue sling. This single point allows us to lift the entire 100+ tons. Next slide, please. We continue to lower the system carefully and slowly to that exactly defined location that I mentioned. And the next slide, you can really see what the site looks like afterwards. This is what the East River has looked like for the last few years. So for those folks who use the ferry or our mariners themselves, you may have seen these buoys. Inside of this buoyed area is the tri-frame that I just showed. The power cables run along the bottom of the river and connect, as I mentioned, on shore to the Con Edison grid. And then every 6 hours, these turbines pivot underwater to capture the changing tide, pivot back and forth and back and forth. Over the 9 months recent operation, we powered roughly 1,000 apartments per day with our turbine, delivering over 300 megawatt hours of electricity to the New York City grid. Next slide, please. I want to give a shout out to the project partners. As I mentioned, NYSERDA and DOE have been huge partners of our work. Some New York, New Jersey-based marine contractors include Don John, Ken's, and KT Marine. For those folks who do follow the waterways, you may have seen their vessels. You may know that those companies, they've been really critical. And then we've worked with a number of other organizations, include Con Edison naturally, and then the National Renewable Energy Lab out in Colorado. And so with that, my last slide. Thank you very much. You know, I'm always sort of disappointed when I tell people that tidal energy is not ideal in the Hudson River. There are some other options for water-based energy in the Hudson, including using wave energy and taking advantage of some of those salinity gradients. But it's a tough place to do what Verdant has done in the East River. But I did want to share what's been going on, at least in marine energy in New York City. So thank you very much for the time.
This is very educational. Really appreciate the presentation, Jonathan. I have a question. Is one of the reasons this is possible and successful is because of the narrow channel created between the Roosevelt Island and the coastline of Long Island City that's there? Yeah, we don't
it does. It's a huge help. It's a huge help. And so you can imagine this huge volume of water from the ocean is constrained into this very narrow channel, and then accelerates out once it passes Hell Gate and out into the Sound. So yeah, it's a super unique geological and sort of hydrodynamic occurrence. Beautiful. East River is a beautiful place.
Leslie.
Thanks, Jeffrey, Chair, for the last time. I have a million questions, but I'm not going to ask them only because it's not really, unfortunately, available for the Hudson River, as you said. So I will ask you this question instead. If we are interested in something like this, or, you know, this type of new energies, what should we on the west side be focusing on for our water energy? I know you mentioned wave energy, which is different than tidal energy, but what can we advocate for? What can we educate ourselves on? If it's not this, what do you suggest?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I can see two aspects. One, specifically water focused, which is your question. So from a water focused perspective in the Hudson, I think what you're going to find are that there are micro power solutions. Some of the things we've looked at would be small scale charging stations located on the piers where people could perhaps charge their cell phones or perhaps charge other small electronics. And you could use some of the small scale wave and some of the small scale water motion to produce micro power, for lack of a better word. I think another option outside of the marine on the Hudson specifically is the concept of wheeling, which is a term in the utilities industry where power is purchased from a different provider that may not be physically connected to your infrastructure. And so the electrons you're getting are still coming from your local grid, but the financial contribution you're making to purchase that power is going to a developer that's actually producing renewable energy. So you can use economic and market opportunities to purchase renewable energy and support the renewable energy sector, even if the electrons at your site aren't coming from the, river itself. And as a customer for the residential market, Green Mountain is one example in the New York market that you all might be familiar with, where you can purchase 100% renewables instead of your traditional offering from the local utility. And if you could find a utility partner that has a wind project or let's say some other interesting renewable project, you can do what's called wheeling. And you can buy that power from them, even though that power is not being delivered directly to your site.
Kind of like the flip side of carbon offset, like it's a little bit of like the flip
Yeah,
of.
it's a very similar concept to a carbon offset, absolutely. Or like a ROC in Europe is a renewable obligation credit. So you can trade these production credits in exchange for consumption credits. So we have some similar models like that in the US, not exactly the same, but similar.
You mentioned, and I'm sorry, one thing, you mentioned the small scale, the micro power. That's what we could probably look at. Unfortunately, we're limited to that. When you say charging stations, we're not looking at charging stations powerful enough to charge new electric cars. We're talking about charging stations for like cell
Much
phone.
smaller electronics.
Small, okay.
More electronics. You could look at battery storage and some other options for increasing your charge, but I'm guessing the cost would be somewhat prohibitive. So I could imagine low voltage DC, like USB charging stations that I think could be charged from the waves and from some of the environmental conditions on the Hudson River.
But if you were to be honest, I mean, that seems like it would be a huge amount of money to put in for someone to charge their cell phones if they're at the park, right? Or am I?
Absolutely, it is. Another really interesting thing, which doesn't provide power to the customer per se, is powering art and in-water art installations from the waves. So you would have lights on floating objects that as the waves came by would provide a small amount of power that would illuminate lights. So you might have some visual indication of motion in addition to the, normal like wave motion. It would be particularly attractive at night where you might not be able to see the waves, but these lights would be coming up and down as the waves pass. The other problem in the Hudson, which, I don't want to waste anyone's time, it's a very heavily navigated river. So you have a huge amount of traffic ranging the entire scale from the local sailing club to the kayakers to the boaters, to the large vessels, to the cruise ships. And so the more space you take up in the river, the more people are going to be concerned about that and the more safety you're going to have. So another constraint is that you need to be quite close to the piers, which further limits kind of the ability you can have to generate at the scales that I think you might be envisioning with like charging a car or charging a cruise ship, which, I love the idea of charging a cruise ship from what's going on in the river, but there are too many technical constraints that probably prevent that from being really economically feasible.
Thank you so much.
But there are some cool things. There are some cool things we can do. And I'm an engineer by training, would love to help find ways to expose the Hudson River, but I think like utility scale energy is probably not really a viable alternative in the Hudson.
Brad?
Well, I'm so glad I asked you to come and you tell me I can't do anything in the Hudson River. That was great. You're making me look good.
Yeah. Well, luckily you framed it as New York City, not just the Hudson River. So I had an out.
Way to hook me up.
I had an out.
Fantastic. So when we spoke too, you said you had pitched to some stakeholders there some ideas, and you were offering up some pilot programs, right? It'd be great if we could come together with some type of scenario to help move the technology along and say, look, I'm not charging cell phones, but we want to turn to the Hudson River Park Trust and say, we could run half the park lights. It'd be great for the cruise ship, but there could be, and I think that's what we were trying to get at. What's a pilot program? What can we use? There's a lot of money spent in just educational portion of it to start the conversational off. And I love the art idea in the water, by the way. If that's anything you gave me tonight, I like that one.
And I think if you could actually use a decent portion of the seawall, and you could install floats along the seawall that could rise and fall with the waves, you could aggregate that low voltage power, that lighting would certainly be one option if cell phone charging was like too gimmicky or really not like the longer term vision. I think the lights in Hudson Park or River Park are probably connected to the grid, which is at 120 volts AC. So I don't know what DC infrastructure the park might have. Maybe like charging these trash trucks that you described, if those are battery operated, There might be ways of getting 48 volts DC that you could charge some of these trash trucks. So, I mean, certainly there are some pilots, but and maybe I'm being too technical, I apologize for that, but I think low voltage DC would be the pilot, not voltage at AC and not trying to connect to the grid. But low voltage DC, there could be some really cool concepts.
Well, I think that's kind of the micro idea that we could start with, and you just turn an
Absolutely.
issue. And if they also came back to me and said, hey, we're building a trash box next to your park, but we're going to try to jump on a pilot program to run the cart, that's interesting. And that also tells a better story.
Well, and I mean, just thinking way outside the box, like what if it could help run the pump that ran the hose that helped with the sanitation program and the cleanliness program? I mean, I'm just thinking like totally outside the box. Like the power to clean the trash box comes from the waves in the Hudson River or something like that.
What were some of the ones you did pitch that your company did consider there?
So as Verdant Power, the concept was the turbines I showed you in the slide deployed in the Hudson River, taking advantage of the incoming and outgoing current of the river. And that proved to really not be feasible. So that's the company that I work for. Separately, I do my own engineering consulting, both in the renewable space and also in the architecture space. And we pitched a series of shoreline restoration and park projects near Little Island, actually, that included some mussels and oyster, interesting stuff, and included these kind of floating platform concepts that would glow based on the strength of the waves. So I mean, for me, engineering, I'm a fluid mechanics person. So like, I'm fascinated by the movement of fluids and try to do all kinds of different stuff with moving fluids whenever I can.
Pat, are you all good there?
Yep.
Thank you. Marty and then Gwen.
I'd like you to continue the thought. My question to you is how much work has been, let me back up. I understand that a tidal estuary, well, estuaries are almost always tidal, that an estuary is a complex body of water with complex flows, and that to do anything sophisticated, there would have to be some kind of steady flow in some place in order to do something sophisticated. So my question is, how much work has been done on mapping out the currents in the Bronx, in the Hudson River estuary? Is that an ongoing project?
I think in general, a fair amount of work has been done. The nature of the tides is understood. The tides are felt, a good 40 or 50 miles up the river. So that piece has been done. There's been a lot of work in the sturgeon community. And I'm guessing there are people here that are interested in the sturgeon and the other endangered species that use the Hudson River. So there's been a lot of work done in terms of fish migration and striped bass, et cetera. In and around the actual lower, Manhattan and this area, I would say less scientific work has been done on the flow, but it's pretty straightforward survey work that we've done that shows and really does characterize that flow condition. I mean, as you can imagine, the sides are very, very shallow in between the piers where the sediment has accumulated over years and years and years. The middle is relatively deep and is roughly scoured by the moving flow, so you don't have as much sediment deposition. And yeah, you have this two-part flow where you have river flow and tidal flow kind of superimposed on top of each other, sometimes adding constructively and sometimes adding non-constructively.
And the conclusion from that, or is that the conclusion? I'm pressing you on the flows because you have dismissed the estuary as a source of major power. And I'm wondering if enough. I'll shut up.
So when the two flows are working destructively, the velocity is not usable at all for energy production. So about half of the time, the flow is non-conducive to the energy generation. So that cuts your capacity factor in half, basically. And then when you actually look at the usable part of the river from a navigational constraint and from a usage constraint, you find just very small parts of the river might be suitable. And on an open market, the cost of that project is not competitive in the open marketplace.
Thank you.
Thanks, Marty.
Yes, sir. I wish you
Gwen?
Yes, I just wanted to say, don't forget about the fact that I know it's not in the water, but next to the water, you've got that nice Hudson River that has wind blowing across it a great majority of the time. So windmills don't have to be huge and ugly. And I just think not forget about those.
A really interesting portfolio would be a suite of sort of small scale solar, small scale wind, and small scale marine working together in a sort of microgrid situation. Could be a fascinating pilot project of showing how community scale renewables can be combined together into something meaningful. I love that idea.
Yep.
Thanks, Gwen. Well,
thank you.
Jonathan, even though, and if I know there's a couple members of the public left, if anybody has any questions, feel free to throw your hand up. You know, yes, the East River, you gave us bad news on the Hudson, but we also, it's useful to learn about these things and talk to professionals like yourself. So I really appreciate you being here tonight. I think it shows, given the questions and the conversation as well. So we really appreciate your time. And I think it just generally probably makes us happy as New Yorkers to know that this power is being generated in the East River on the other side of town.
In your backyard.
That's a good thing.
Right in your backyard. For sure. Yep. Thank you so much. And Brad, thank you for the invitation. And thank you all for your time. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you. All righty. Thank you guys for that. I found very educational conversation. I think this is something that's been on our in sort of our conversation for a number of years. So I'm glad we got to start it, and I think there were some interesting ideas the committee can continue to ideate on. Mr. Pasquarella, I see the hand up.
Just 2 points, Jeffrey. What I took out of it was community scale renewables pilot program. And I'm sure the Hudson River is buying green with their energy, but we should check.
Yeah, I like this community scale idea as well. And certainly I think we should know where the trust is getting its power from, though I think it's city DOT. So any other sort of committee comments or direction anybody wants to share based on that sort of conversation we just had? Alan?
Jeffrey?
Oh, yes. No, I'll go Alan, then we'll go back to you, Brad. Alan?
Well, I think the wind situation that Gwen brought up, and his comment about maybe doing like some sort of a pilot down towards the bottom of the river might be something that the trust might want to look into, as they're doing a lot of work down in that section with the estuary. Aren't they putting up a building or something? There's a new building going up there.
Yeah, well, the estuarium eventually, that's a ways off.
Eventually, but yeah, I mean, you know, they're doing a lot of work in the river as it is. There might be something we can get together with them on in terms of doing some sort of study, perhaps, and maybe doing something small, very small scale in what the speaker spoke about for next year, for another chair, another co-chair.
Great.
Thank you, Jeffrey.
Absolutely. Brad, back to you.
But to follow up on that point, you know, do we reach out to, with all this new federal money coming in? I mean, now's the time to see if we could strike, to see if we could make a deal. Do we write a letter to one of our senators and say, hey, can you help us spearhead a program to try to bring some green energy to the West Side? As broad as that, and then as simple as charging, you know, some go-karts, you know, to run the garbage, you know, but like, can we get it moving? And who do we talk to, Jeffrey, Mr. Chair?
I think
part of the question you're asking should be directed at Jonathan to see what his network of colleagues and acquaintances are that might be interested in doing such a project. I mean, it's clear that the members of the committee isn't going to start doing the technical work on this. We have to find somebody to do it.
And
Martin,
I wonder,
I think that's a good point. I'm just saying the U.S. Department of Energy has the ability to kind of try to say, hey, can we do a program here? I mean, at that level. And then it seeps down to
And
the private level.
I can already think of at least one or two funding mechanisms at the Department of Energy that relate to island, community scale, resilience, grid issues. And I mean, actually, this ties in super well with like New York City's entire strategic plan for grid resilience and, you know, resiliency in general. And I love it because I think it would tie back to like the whole waste issue. If you could only get 48 volts on your charging and you could only run your trash truck for like 30 minutes, that's certainly an incentive to reduce the amount of trash you develop. Because if you run out of charge on your trash truck, then you can't move your trash.
that is true. So Brad, you asked my sort of thought on it, and I wonder if it's, you know, there's environmental committees in both the state Senate and the state assembly, and they certainly take up issues like this. There is a, I can't think of the name of the commission, but that not just oversees utilities, but is a part of infrastructure as it relates to power. And so I think there's multiple ways to raise this issue. So I guess I would kind of, if somebody wants to propose a summary of a letter of what we want, we could do it. I just wonder if do we have something we're asking for yet?
I mean, we could be asking for a pilot program for exactly what we said, a community scale renewable pilot program, if we want to be that specific. Or do we just say, hey, what if we, I mean, maybe it's not a letter, Jeffrey, but maybe we talk to Brad Holyman's office and say, hey, where should we start?
Yep, Brad, I think that's absolutely a thing that we should do. Sorry, Leslie, go ahead.
No, it's okay. That's why I raised. I think we should first informally. I'm sure a lot of these talks are in the works already, right? Up in state legislature. So I think we have a good relationship with our assembly members and our state senator. We can, Brad, maybe informally say, hey, what is on your radar as far as environment improvements, energy improvements for our district, and what can we specifically ask for, advocate for, work on? Because I'm guessing this conversation has been had a number of, right, Jeffrey? I mean, I know they're talking.
I would think so. Mm-hmm.
I'm just saying, instead of going from like, hey, you know, ground zero, you know, I mean, just from flat ground here saying, let's do this or let's do that.
Yeah. So
I would certainly be happy to answer the technical questions, and I have a connection to the small wind industry. And so when you talk about these small scale wind turbines, that's a unique sector of the wind energy industry. I also have some connections in the solar space and obviously experience in the marine space. So, you know, if I can help the committee at all, obviously just let me know.
That's great. Thank you, Jonathan. We appreciate that. I think there's a way to certainly raise this to our state electeds on this. I think it makes a whole lot of sense. For those that don't know, Maya Burlow, Brad Hoylman's CB4 rep, is she's going to be on his Albany team now. And so Brad is going to be bringing on a new community board for liaison for district issues. I know a lot of them are not on the call this evening because they had a 6-hour Penn Station hearing last night about what's going on around Penn Station. So I know many of them had a late evening last night. So I will forgive them for not being here tonight. I chatted with a couple of them today. So I think this was very useful and educational, and something we can keep going. And I think, to Leslie's point, we start with an informal conversation, flag it for Brad, for Linda, and for Dick, and we sort of see what we can do in terms of next steps. And also, if anybody else is plugged into or aware of other professionals or experts in the field and in these industries, I think this is where we are on the learning circuit for this, so that way we can have an informed ask that is appropriate, and sort of not flippant just because it's du jour of the moment. So I appreciate the conversation tonight. Does anybody have any other new or old business? Thanks, Jonathan. Well, with that, I would like to say thank you to this committee, which has brought me entertainment and education and a lot of good work over the past couple of years. I am humbled and honored to be moving up the ranks, as you will. And so I won't be at this meeting on the regular, though many of the topics on this committee are near and dear to my heart. So I certainly intend to pop my head in when is necessary. As is customary, I'll be making decisions when my term officially starts on my replacement and any other changes that are going to take place across the board. Transparently, Jesse and I, we have a lot of catching up to do on this stuff. That's kind of the way it happens. So he and I have a long meeting scheduled next week. And so stay tuned for that. In the meantime, Marty, are you okay to make the slight adjustment to the squash letter and we can get that rolled out?
I'll take care of the squash letter tomorrow.
Perfect. Well, if there's nothing else, everybody, thank you again, and certainly enjoy the season.
Thank you, Jeffrey.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Jeffrey. Happy holidays, everybody.
My pleasure. Happy
Thank you.
holidays, everybody.
Thank you, Jeffrey, for being a really
Thanks,
great
Jeffrey.
co-chair.
Yep.
Thanks.
My pleasure, everyone. Bye.
I second that, Marty. Good night. Thank you.
Good night, everybody.